Hello and welcome back to the Dilshan Time channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review on a Rolex that is kind of special to me because it was my first ever Rolex. I am of course talking about the Rolex Oysterdate Precision reference number 6694. I've currently got two of them sitting in my collection, as you might be able to see. One is the white dial and one is a black dial variant. This is just another Explorer that's currently sitting in my Prism Trio, I think that's what it's called, a Prism Trio wristwatch case by Deluxe. I'm currently in a blue phase, so they've both got blue straps on them, and they're in a blue case as well with blue suede. I just love it. I love these cases. They're awesome. They really are. I'll be doing a full review on wristwatch cases and watch accessories, I think. I'm gonna compare and contrast perhaps. So stay tuned for that on the channel. Anyway, let's get into the review of the Rolex Oysterdate Precision reference number 6694. So the Rolex 6694 is a date-only wristwatch by Rolex. These watches were produced for about 20 years between the 1960s and the 1980s. These watches were popular in Europe and Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, where Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia sit. That's where you can find these in an influx. These are 34mm wide, which makes it a very nice wristwatch for dressy occasions, and it is my go-to dress watch. They wear slightly bigger, almost to like 35, 36, I don't know, that's how I feel. I own a two-tone Rolex Datejust as well, the reference number 1601, and I find that they wear very similar. They were cased in the classic Rolex Oyster case and featured tritium lume on the dial. It came with a non-quickset date feature and a cyclops on the crystal. These come with a screw-down crown that allowed you to swim with the wristwatches back in the day, but I strongly would not recommend you swim or do any vigorous activities underwater with your vintage Rolex 6694. They do come with a 19mm lug width, which makes strap pairing a little harder, but there are still quite a few straps that you can get for your Rolex 6694. As you see, I've put both of mine on a blue leather strap. One of them is from Deluxe, who make awesome wrist straps, so shout out to them. And the other is from the House of Straps, which costs a little more, but shout out to them as well, because you do get that luxurious feeling in that slightly thicker leather with padding on the leather strap. So, my black dial Rolex 6694 was made in 1976. It comes with gold indices. It makes strap pairing a little more challenging, but it's still a very nice watch nonetheless. This watch came with an original Rolex Oyster bracelet with the bracelet code 78350-19, which suggests the bracelet was introduced in 1975. It comes with the 557 end links, but you can also find a 571 end link which was produced in this same period. However, this Oyster bracelet was not original to this specific watch, as deciphered by the clasp code L10, which suggests the watch was made in the 10th month of the year 1987. If I were to look for an original Rolex Oyster bracelet from the year 1976, I would have to look for VA or the letter A as opposed to the letter L. Next, I'll talk about the white dial Rolex 6694, which is from the year 1960. It comes with an original Rolex riveted bracelet, reference 7205. The riveted bracelet was introduced in 1954 along with the reference number 7206. The end links state the number 60, which suggests that the watch bracelet was made in the year 1960. However, there is no clasp code on this bracelet, as before the year 1967, no codes were engraved or embossed on the clasp of Rolex watches. I managed to pick these watches up for $1,800 and $2,200 respectively. So now I'm going to give you some tips if you are interested in buying a Rolex 6694, so you know what you have to look out for. The easiest way is to look between the lugs for the serial number and the reference number of the wristwatch. There should be 6694 and serial numbers from the period between 1960 and the late 80s. The lume of the dial has to be tritium, marked T Swiss T on the bottom. Lume from this era typically faded, but there are some cases where the tritium lume is still well intact. If you see that there are no lume plots, this means the dial has been reconditioned and that you should probably stay clear of the wristwatch. Now, I'm quite a fan of patina, but there comes to a point where it's corrosion, and that's where you need to watch out for these vintage watches. So if the dial has too much corrosion, you should probably stay clear as well. Next, you should check for an original Rolex signed crown with a single underline below the coronet. The underline means that the crown was designed for a fully stainless steel watch. If you check inside the caseback, there should be a clearly engraved reference number 6694 on the inside of the caseback. You can obviously then also check the movement, and there are plenty of pictures online where you can reference the movement of the Rolex 6694 with what is in front of you at the point of purchase. Another important thing to look out for is the bracelet. Make sure you study the end links and clasp markings very carefully. This is because vintage Rolex bracelets are getting harder and harder to source. These bracelets are very fragile, so they often break, and people who own Rolexes with the original bracelets rarely take a liking to selling the bracelets. Thus, the price of the Rolex vintage bracelets are very high. So if you're buying a Rolex 6694 and paying a premium for the bracelet, you have to do your research and make sure that the bracelet is correct to the watch. Finally, you should inspect the crystal. Although some people say that the crystal doesn't really matter because most of the time they're replaced, I prefer buying an original Rolex with an original crystal. These were not micro embossed like the latest Rolex models, so you can check the cyclops. For replaced crystals, the cyclops are usually very blurry or distorted in some way, so it has to be perfect. Make sure that you can see the date very clearly. Another thing to look out for on the date wheel are the open 6s and open 9s. Make sure that every number with a 6 or a 9 in it on the date wheel has the number flowing all the way without connecting. This basically means there has to be a gap on the number so that the 6s and 9s don't touch. So let me get into the positives of the Rolex 6694. First of all, it's its undeniable versatility. Although it can't be taken underwater, I've heard stories of people who use their Rolex 6694 as a beta watch, and I used to do that not long ago as well. It is obviously a fantastic dress watch as it's so slender and can easily slide under any cuff, and it's also a perfect everyday watch just for casual wear, or maybe to a brunch or for a dinner. The next point is obviously its name. It is a Rolex, and it's a very accessible Rolex. Although they're getting harder and harder to find at a good price, you are paying for the name, and to wear a Rolex just gives you that little bit of confidence, that joy, that feeling of success. After all, it is a crown for every achievement. Another positive is its manual wind movement. What I mean when I say that is that I tend to like watches that are not quartz. I also like watches that are manual wind because if you're not wearing them, you can always wind them up and they'll keep good time, and you don't need a watch winder like you do for automatic watches if you want to keep them running. They are also relatively cheap to service as there are not too many complications on the watch. Another positive is its value retention. From 5 years ago, the prices of Rolex 6694s have inflated to double their price in 2021. Now let's get into the not so goods. First of all, there is no quick set date, so if the watch stops, you're going to have to wind through every single day of the month. Another con is that the prices are getting more and more expensive, so if you are planning to get one, I would strongly urge you to get one sooner before they get into Datejust territory. At that point, I would suggest you pick up a Datejust instead. Another con is its bracelet. Now, these are really old, and this year these watches turn about 40 to 60 years old. The bracelets are very flimsy and they jingle and jangle, and they don't have solid end links. For these reasons, I do not wear my watches on their bracelets. The last point are for the 6694 buyers who want to buy a 6694 in its fully original condition. Now, there are many Franken 6694s with custom dials, custom hands, some with even custom bezels, so I would make sure I do my research. So there you have it, the review of my first Rolex, the Rolex 6694. Now, I do a little bit of watch trading, buying and selling, flipping if you will, and these watches are some of my favorite watches to do them with because their prices are crazy all around the world. They are getting rarer and their prices are always on the rise, so I could literally pick one up and in a few months make $100, $200 on it. Their smaller cases and slenderness make them my go-to dress watch, and for any fancy occasion, dinners, I could easily dress them up just like that by switching on and putting on a brown or black leather strap. They are just the perfect entry-level Rolex watch. I don't think I could name a better entry-level Rolex watch than the Rolex 6694 because of its price. Oyster Perpetuals used to be the best entry-level Rolex watches, but their prices are crazy now, so if you're not willing to spend too much, you can get these for under £2,000 and they have incredible bang for buck. I used to wear them as a beta, not anymore. They're still running fine. It's got a very strong movement. The caliber 1225, which beats at 21,600 beats per hour. And of course, it has the date function, which I don't know why, but I find so important on my watches. I feel like, if I'm not lying to myself, I do check my watches for their date more than I do for the time. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the Rolex 6694. If you have any questions, leave your questions in the comment section below and I'll do my best to reply to as many comments as possible. Thank you so much for watching my video. Leave a like if you've enjoyed it. Double click the dislike button if you've not. And I will see you in the next video. So take care.